Well, it is great to be able to meet like this after so many years when we haven't been able to meet. So really looking forward to this weekend together. I thought I'd introduce you to a few of my biking buddies. These are something I really enjoy doing is mountain biking, and that's sometimes multiple days out in the alpine areas or just day trips from my property. That's my friend Miles. I bike a lot with him, and we can just bike from our house and be into places like that. We don't have to drive anywhere we can just bike to places like this. While we all love biking, we all have niggles and things that sort of make it hard. So there's sort of like little injuries that we carry, or even maintaining fitness. Biking up hills gets harder and harder with age. Of course, we can look forward to having an e-bike one day and extend our biking into the future. I'm not quite there yet, which I'm pleased about. But this is a really, and this is true, isn't it, that something that Paul says, and I'm going to be speaking out of 2 Corinthians chapter 4 mostly, in the talks I'm giving this weekend. And he says in chapter 4:16, though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. And the outward wasting away can be so many different things. It can be obviously physical things, it can be discouragement, it can be stress, it can become overwhelmed with things in life, failure. There's lots of things in our outer life that really can weigh us down, and it can feel like we're wasting away. This is an amazing statement that we can be renewed day by day in the midst of the things in the outer world. And there's so much in our outer world these days that can discourage us, and it feels like things are somewhat wasting away. This is a wonderful thing too that Paul says, that in the midst of this going on, one of the ways we renew ourselves is to fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. And that's what we'll be thinking about this weekend, how we can be fixing our eyes on things that are unseen, things that do renew us in the Lord, renew us in vision, and renew us in pursuit of the things that God is calling us to. Part of this is one of the wonderful things, and we'll be looking at this, is as we look to Jesus, which is our part, Jesus promises to do all the heavy lifting in terms of the renewing. So he's the one that transforms us from the inside out. And this is a wonderful thing. We need to place ourselves before Jesus and place ourselves like we all are this weekend, where we can look to God, look to Jesus, and allow him to do this renewing work in us. So I wanted to say thank you and well done for being here this weekend. You have made a choice to put yourself in a place where you can hear from God, which is what we're praying will happen this weekend, and so that we can experience this renewal that comes from the Lord, and in the midst of the things that we find challenging. God promises to meet with us as we seek him and as we come to him. And it's been my prayer that will happen this weekend. Well, why renew? Why this theme for the weekend? And I think it's a response to what has been a very challenging time this past 2.5 years. I think we've all found it challenging in different ways. Some people have really struggled during the pandemic and COVID. Some people have experienced significant losses, particularly perhaps overseas. There's been, tragic losses over this time, people's jobs and health, and you'll know people who have really struggled through the last 2.5 years. In the midst of all these things, and as Paul says, outwardly we're wasting away, inwardly we're being renewed day by day. So we need to be renewed by God, renewed in our vision, and renewed in pursuit of the things that God is doing in the world around us, hence our theme. 5 years ago, I spoke at the national gathering that we had in Auckland, and it's quite cool that we have a new logo now, thanks to Brian Wachter, so that looks a little bit plain compared to the new one. But we were thinking about how the Israelites, we looked at in Isaiah in that national gathering, and we saw how the exiles in Babylon faced great challenges to their faith, and they struggled to believe that God was powerful enough to do anything anything about their situation, or that he even really cared. And so what we believe when we go through difficult times is very important. And without having that faith in God, who is aware of what's going on in our lives, can do something about it and really cares, we don't really look to him and trust his promises. So the people in exile, the people who were in Babylon, were sort of in the grip of the Babylonians and their predicament, and they were struggling to really believe the promises of God. Walter Brueggemann says, despair is the defining pathology that robs the church of missional energy and stewardship generosity. So we can become preoccupied with ourselves, and we can struggle to rethink or reimagine what life can be like with God as we do that, which is what we want to do. We want to be renewed in what we think about God and imagine what he can do. We need to be renewed in our vision for God. And so that brings us to why we were focused on being renewed in God, renewed in vision, and renewed in pursuit of what he's doing. One of the things that I find very helpful for me is to take some time to seek God at different points in the year. So at the start of the year, I was at this place called Ngāti That's a little prayer hut on the hill. Actually, you can see the prayer hut just here, that little building at the top of the hill, or the bottom of just on the top of the buildings there. It has no electricity, just has a bed and a desk, and it's a great place to go and seek God. And when I was there, I walk around the roads, I join the community in some of their times of prayer, and generally go to hear from God and seek him. And I was praying through Isaiah 33, and this verse stood out to me: your eyes will see the King in his beauty and view a land that stretches afar. And I think what happened for me is I experienced renewal as I did that. So as I walked along the road and read through, I was reading through Isaiah 33 and starting to get excited about what I was reading, thinking about what God is saying in the chapter, praying it back to God, and then just getting really excited about these ideas and praying them for our work, praying them for people. And I think that's how renewing can happen. And it's what this verse is saying: your eyes will see the King in his beauty, and you'll view a land that stretches afar. So my reflection on Scripture went from thoughts and ideas to something that was impacting my heart, to worship and prayer and praise to God for who he is, and then trusting him that he'll keep our vision clear as a movement and help me with my vision, which is what I see in that second part: view a land that stretches afar. We really need to be renewed in our vision of what is God doing in our world. And these are not easy times to be a Christian, to know how to share our faith, to disciple people in the way of Jesus. So we really need God, and we need each other to help us to do that. We need to be renewed in these things, which is what we're doing this weekend. In our Navigator vision, some of the phrases that point to what we're thinking about this weekend, that's our calling at the top to advance the gospel of Jesus and his kingdom into the nations through spiritual generations of labourers living and discipling among the nations. One of the things that I really hope that, I guess my prayer is that we can all grow in our wonder of the beauty of the gospel and the good news, because that's partly to do with being renewed in God and renewed in our vision, is to see just how good this gospel is, and it meets every need that we have in our lives and every need in the lives of our friends. And I've got friends who don't know Jesus, and you can easily think, well, really, do they need the good news? Do they need Jesus in their lives? And how would they find him? And but actually, Jesus is the answer to everything that we face in life. And having a big view of the good news and a big view of Jesus' kingdom can really help us. So that's one of the things we're hoping for this weekend, that we'll be renewed in just how good this gospel message is that we have in our hearts. And it's good news for everybody. It's good news for all of our friends and all of the situations they face. And so one of the values in our Navigator Calling Vision and Value Statement is the transforming power of the gospel. The gospel can transform our lives, and it has transformed our lives, and it will continue transforming us, being renewed day by day throughout life. And then in our vision statement, there's that beautiful phrase, transformed men and women, fragrant with humility and the aroma of Christ. And it makes a big difference. We had a friend round for dinner on Tuesday night. He's a neighbour, and really enjoy him a lot. And he just loved being with us. You could tell on the way out, he said, I so enjoy coming around to your place. And but it's because of Jesus in us and Jesus in you. This is the aroma of Christ, and we are this to other people. And so to be among our friends and to be able to, they can see and sense and feel it, smell it, taste it, and they need to hear it. So that's something we'll be thinking about too over the weekend. This is a promise that we are praying in the Navigators from Isaiah 44:3-4. I will pour water on the thirsty land and streams on the dry ground. I will pour out my spirit on your offspring and my blessing on your descendants. They will spring up like grass in a meadow, like poplar trees beside flowing streams. Many of you know we have, Juliet and I live on a block of land, so we have paddocks of grass. The grass is not springing up right now because the paddocks are too wet. So we're actually struggling to grow grass for our animals at the moment. In fact, Juliet was on the phone to our haymaker and asking if he had any bales in the shed to sell us just this week, which he didn't. But we're waiting for the rain to stop and the sun to warm up and for the grass to come springing up, which it does. And we also have poplars on our property. So they remind me of this promise that God has given us. And these are two things that help us when we think about these promises from God in the Scripture. This is another one of our values in the Navigators: expectant faith and persevering prayer rooted in the promises of God. So it's 6 years ago when God put that promise on my heart and gave me an image too. That's an image of a sea of labourers. So for us, we see the gospel moving into our nation through spiritual generations of labourers, people who can share the gospel with their neighbours, with their workmate, and when those people respond to Christ, help them to grow to know Jesus and then share it with their family members and their friends. And so that's how we see the good news spreading through relational networks. I was thinking, been praying this promise for a while. Part of you thinks, well, am I still praying this promise? But I really sense God, no, you carry on praying the same promise. You don't just think, that was last year's promise and now I'll have something new for this year. I think this is a really great value: expectant faith, persevering prayer rooted in the promises of God. Some of these things we pray many, many years and keep trusting God for. And we see this in Hebrews. The people of faith in that wonderful chapter saw and welcomed them, God's promises, from a distance. And some of them didn't actually get to see, it says many of them didn't see the fulfillment of these promises. But they were fulfilled. And so we can be praying things now for generations, for the next generation. And we're encouraged to pray for the next generation and the following. Even in Psalm 78, it talks about that, praying for the subsequent generations. I've wondered sometimes who prayed for us now. There are people who prayed for all of us in this room now who have long since passed away. So God is still answering prayer generations later. It's amazing. So we can pray things now that will have an influence beyond our lifetime. So it's wonderful. God invites us into this expectant faith, persevering prayer rooted in the promises of God, and seeing and welcoming from a distance what God is promising to do. So may we be renewed in these things this weekend too, renewed in our vision for what God can do and what we can be praying. as I was preparing for this weekend, I thought, one thing I try to do, I'm sure you do too, when you're sharing with others, it needs to be real in your life. So, you don't want to be passing on something you're not experiencing or pressing into yourself. So I was asking the Lord, what do you want to renew in my life? And so I want to share about that over the course of the weekend. But that's something I'd encourage you to be praying. Lord, what do you want to renew in me as we go into this weekend? What I'd like to do now is I had the opportunity to interview Mutua. I was at a gathering that Mutua was at recently, a couple of months ago. So I thought, I'd love to interview him. I really enjoy Mutua. I'm sure you'll enjoy the things that he's going to share with us about being renewed in relation to our conference. We've actually put the transcript of this interview in your booklet, so you can turn. I think it's after the notes pages. So if you want to follow the interview, you can do that. I did the best I could. I set up my phone and pointed in the right direction, cut my head off. But we've got Mutua sharing his thoughts on being renewed. So I'll play this now, and then we'll go from there. So,
Mutua, thank you for being willing to share some thoughts and reflections for our national gathering on Renew. So our theme is being renewed in God, renewed in our vision, and renewed in the pursuit of things that God has called us to do. So I wondered if you could share what comes to mind when you think about being renewed in God.
Well, when you asked that question, Simon, what first came to mind was the idea of hope. And that those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength, Isaiah 40. That hoping in the Lord renews our strength. We renew our strength as we hope in God. It's not so much in the things that we can touch. It's in the fact that hope is as solid a reality in God's economy as anything that we can physically prove to be real. It is just as real as far as God is concerned. So that renews my strength in that I am aware that there is a great purpose that God is carrying out. Another passage that comes to mind is Psalm 34. Psalm 34 talks about looking to God and being radiant. So being renewed, we cannot be radiant if we are not really being renewed, unless we are pretending, unless we are putting it on. So look to Him and be radiant, so your faces will never be ashamed. So those two thoughts about hoping in the Lord, and as Romans says, that hope does not disappoint. We will never be let down by that. And then the Psalm 34 idea that we find strength from God in who He is. So celebrating Him, really.
Yeah, that's really good. And for you personally in those things, so growing in your hope and growing and looking to God, are there some things that help you to be sustained in those things or renewed in them personally that are helpful for you?
Worship. And the reflecting on my reality in the light of what God has said and who God is. So it's not just kind of thanking God for who He is in a sort of an abstract manner, but realizing that who He is applies to my situation now. And that there is no situation that ever comes my way that God is not fully aware of and for which He is not fully adequate. So it's to apply the reality of worship of God to my situation, letting God speak into that, and allowing Him to move me along in understanding, caring not so much about how it will all work out, but the fact that He is totally adequate for every situation that comes my way, and that He cares far too much for me, for there to be a better way than just to follow Him wholeheartedly.
Yeah. Can you think of one or two stories in the worldwide partnership of just maybe people that you've seen being renewed in their vision of God, and how that is overflowing into their lives, perhaps to their ministry as well, the way that they're influencing others? So, yeah, just these stories.
Recently, we were in the Middle East. My wife and I were meeting with the MENA team, and the new regional director for our work and his wife were sharing about how at one stage God led them to support there's somebody that they knew that had come to Christ, and in the Middle East, it can be dangerous to confess Christ. Anyway, this guy ended up being a martyr. He was killed for his faith. He was very outspoken, left behind 3 children, and our friends then at that point had to decide what risks they were willing to take, because by stepping into the gap and taking in those children, that meant that they were exposed to similar dangers and threats. And they did. We did take these children in. We've had the privilege of meeting with them. Now they are grown. So this is many years later. But the idea of God's faithfulness, looking back and hearing that story brings encouragement, and it stimulates the faith of people like us who hear the story. So it's the fact that our obedience can end up being a huge blessing to many others. Many people will hear about what God has done, and they will be caused to trust God in a fresh way. The sacrifice they made was quite remarkable. At that stage, it was risky. Took them into their home. Suddenly, they had more kids than they had of their own, and it has turned out to be a rather lovely story. But while it was happening, they had to trust that God would carry them. So the renewal of our strength happens when we allow ourselves to need that renewal. And as I listened to them, I thought they needed God to renew their strength, because they were stretching out beyond what they were humanly speaking capable of. And so I was challenged by that, and I thought much of my ability to find renewal in God depends on my willingness to need that renewal. So it's all very well to talk about being renewed in the Lord, and yet I'm doing everything I can to not need Him to do it.
Oh, yeah, that's good. Wow, that's a very good. So their obedience really, and their response to God's leading, placed them in a position where they really needed God.
They needed God, yes. And now the story sounds lovely when you hear it. At that time, it was a real. They really had to get before the Lord and be convinced that God wanted them to do this.
Thank you, Mutua.
Those are 2 phrases that I really appreciated from what Mutua was sharing. There is no situation I face that God is not fully aware of and for which He is not fully adequate. It's such a great truth, and that we know is true in the Bible, but to really be aware of that. And so often I think that we can try to figure it out on our own, and not really face the things that are difficult and bring them to God. So I think that's a really helpful idea that Mutua shared. And then as we think about being renewed, renewal of our strength happens when we allow ourselves to need that renewal. So that's also a really good thing. When I was a student, I used to meet with someone, Ross Nelson. He was leading the student work, and one of his favourite questions for me me was, Simon, what are you trusting God for, or what faith steps are you stepping out in faith in? So he was always pushing me to sort of be living by faith and to not just be comfortable where I was, and that's a good thing. And so renewal of our strength is when we're obeying God and really needing God. What I'd like us to do now is, as we go into the weekend, is to really reflect a little bit on are there some things that God you want to renew in me, or am I facing some situations where I really need your help? On the back of your booklet, we've put some questions. So I wanted us just to take 10 minutes now to just reflect and think about the weekend ahead. You could be quietly praying and asking God. So where in your life do you need renewal? You could ask the Lord, what do you want to renew in my life this weekend? Is there something in your life at present that is beyond your strength? So you need God to renew your strength? Or is God prompting you to obey him in something that feels beyond your strength? So take 10 minutes to reflect and prayerfully with the Lord, and perhaps write some thoughts down as we go into our weekend together.